when you get so macho that a child's laughter or cry or an old man's struggle to step up on a curve because he's old, and I know my reputation as an artist is good time rock and roll, and yeah, there's a time for that, but I have little tolerance for disrespect. And we look at people that are old and we make them the brunt of their jokes. And the truth be known, we probably couldn't carry their lunch on one of their easier days when they were in their prime. And something to remember. But now do you see why I'm always laughing? Because when I get serious, it frightens people. Life is so short, and it's just I spend a lot of time with my dog and myself, and and my cat, and my family, my wife, my friends. Once, a side note, before I set out to become a quote-unquote rock and roll recording artist, I was in Louisiana, and we and myself and another friend, now deceased, made a deal in a motel. We shook hands at about 2 or 3 in the morning to come and set out and get a gold record. He's now deceased. But people told me, did you think that you were going to make it when you set out? And I just have to walk away from stupid questions like that, you know. Nah, I just set out to fail every day. We thought, man, what's the latest thing we failed at? Let's go fail again. But in the midst of all the naysayers, don't tune into the naysaying. Tune in to the voice that you're supposed to hear. And you'll recognize which one it is. And oddly enough, I don't think anything happens by coincidence in a person's life when we look back. But there was a dear friend, turned out to be a dear friend. His name was Fate, F-A-T-E. He had survived a war prison camp. They'd come out and beat him every day. And when I met him, he was arthritic and all crippled up. And I told him, Fate, I was in Louisiana. I said, I'm going to make a run for it, Fate. I'm going to give it a shot. And he says, go ahead, Junior. I says, I know you've been through a lot, Fate. What can you give me? What can you tell me that will help me? By then I already knew that experience, people say, experience is the best teacher. That's for stupid people. Humility is the assistant of the best teacher. It's better to hear it from someone who's been through it, so you don't have to go through it. And Fate said to me, Junior, remember this. You can count all your friends on one hand if you had fingers missing. And then he says, never laugh at an old man, bet on another man's trick, or mess with a crazy woman. Either one of those 3 can get you killed. And when Fate spoke, I listened. And he didn't say any more. I knew I didn't understand it, and he probably perceived that I didn't understand it as he stood there telling me. But he believed that eventually I would recognize those road marks. So I left. It took me a while. But then when you stop to think as time went by, it says, never laugh at an old man. If you ever laugh at an individual who's older than you, as I was saying a while ago, some poor individual who's trying to muster up enough strength to raise his leg to get up on the sidewalk, it's a foolish thing to do. Because if you can't learn anything from that old man, at least you can learn how to survive for who knows what he's been through to get to that point. Never bet on another man's trick. You know, the Ponzi, the flip-flap, the pea in the shells, okay? And people walk up on the sidewalk and say, oh, let me bet $1. I think I can beat him. Well, if that's your trick, you'd be doing it, number one. Number two, he's not there just overnight. He's probably practiced who knows how many months on that particular trick so that he himself can't see himself switching the pea. There's a side story to that. I'll come back. And I'll tell you now, I had an uncle that was a card mechanic, had fingers missing on his hand, and he could deal during World War II. That's how he made extra money. There was about 13 of us in a shotgun shack. It's not a poor me story, these are just facts. But anyway, he'd practice on weekends. He worked in a shipyard, but he made extra money when there was a mullet coming through town, or he'd go to the private gambling houses and he'd show up as just a regular player, but he'd clean house for the house, and it paid him well, and he'd make his cut. But he'd deal seconds, thirds, top, bottom, any way you want to do it. And then he'd call us in one by one, kids, maybe about 4 or 5 of us, and he'd sit us across the table and he'd start dealing, and he'd say to each one of us, anytime you see a card coming from anywhere other than the top, you holler. So we'd sit there as he did it. And then when we couldn't catch him, he'd sit in front of the mirror, see if he could catch himself. Because that was his trick. Somebody who came in off the street, you know, you're not going to beat somebody who's been switching the pea and the shells for how many years, how many hours before he came out to take your money. So never bet on another man's trick.